taste in art. In 1985, I moved to Canaan, and the house we bought was called the Anna Brown House. And through Dr. Segala, who you might recall, who lived on Route 7 a few doors away from me, he introduced me to a woman named, or a person, now long deceased, named Fedelia Bridges, and gave me some literature just about her life as an artist. Fidelia Bridges lived in Dr. Segala, succeeded to Fidelia Bridges' house. And if you know, you knew
Dr. Lou?
Dr. Lou Segala. He had a red little farmhouse right on Route 7, just on the same side as my house, which is on the golf course side. And so I became acquainted with Fidelia Bridges and learned in some of the papers that the house I owned was an old inn, which had been purchased by the Brown family. And you will learn about the Brown family and Fidelia's origins, starting in Salem and ending in Canaan, with many stops on the way. So Catherine has done a lot of work to pull all this together, and hopefully all the technology will cooperate.
Oh, great. Just don't breathe on the screen and I think that.
Well, we've got one image up, so we've succeeded that part. This feels like somehow a victory for perseverance in getting this set up. And I'm glad that we're able to show some of the pictures because this woman was a very visual woman. And it would be a shame, if we couldn't enjoy some of her art and some pictures of her.
Oh, no! I told you not to breathe on the screen.
What? Can someone stand in back of it and just hold it?
No. Let's try.
I'm going to see you guys have a cigarette with the rest of the guys.
There's a wall here.
It went down.
She tried that.
I'm going right down the twist. I have to go down the end. I don't want to spill my tea on somebody's head though.
There's seconds at the table.
Yeah, there's plenty of food over there. Pat, the tea is just right. Yes.
Even to the number line.
Oh, it should be. It's
That was like
what's on the table or not? Ladle that is wonderful.
Okay.
She's taking
You made it, right?
I put a minute ago. I'll let you know.
Okay. I have 3 recipes. The last one is my lights. I like it the best. Yeah. They're so light. Hey,
What is the latest one?
All right, well, we're waiting for this to come back up.
Ladies,
She used to work at the station.
Okay.
The woman who just spoke. Oh, I'm sorry, Eileen.
ladies,
Yes.
she's going to start again.
I wasn't watching at that time.
Oh,
Sorry.
here we have Fedelia coming back, I hope. While I'm waiting for that to hopefully work its magic. Fedelia Bridges was certainly not a Canaan native. She didn't arrive in Canaan until late in her life, and by then it had been an illustrious life in a very subdued kind of way. So today, if you were to go down to Mountain View Cemetery and go in the second entrance, second from either side, you would find a small corner of land that is dedicated as the Fedelia Bridges Bird Sanctuary. And it's a lovely little spot. I frankly have never had the time to sit there and enjoy it, but it's particularly appropriate that this woman...
Well, the other one, right against the wall looks pretty good.
I just raise and use the walls. forget that.
And it's heavy, so is that what the deal is in this study?
It's supposed to be locked.
Yeah, you can use the wall.
There's a very raised,
Well, I don't know how they work that, but stay out of it.
is there a way we can turn it around that way?
That one is, or that one is. Yeah.
That's what we're thinking.
Yeah.
No, the big turn down.
Is that Adam?
We're gonna have some movement, ladies. You're gonna go on that wall and just use the wall instead of the screen, which means we're gonna have to do some shifting with tables.
People won't be able
So
to see
pass
it
it.
otherwise if we don't.
How far back do you have to be?
In this aisle, like,
Yeah, I don't know what they're doing with that.
We're going to use the wall. And then maybe,
Can one of you ladies swap over to that chair? So we can get Catherine in here.
sit over there.
So right now, I'm trying to figure how far away we live.
This is United Green.
Yeah, they're gonna use the wall. So this is the garden. Scrap or something.
You guys are gonna have supper here by the time.
Slide in.
Let's take down these two.
We can take those, I think. I'll just put these over. This paper? Yeah, here, I'll just leave them. No, I got it. I can't get the fingers under them.
Let me see if I can get how far I can get.
Holes in the wall, holes in the wall.
I know it. Well, you know what, we just go with the flow.
Hold it over there, it's
Go with
fine.
the flow.
Don't even need paper. Well, it depends on whether they're all upright. You doing entertaining the back row?
That's what this talk is worth. All right, look at
I
that.
think the check is coming your way from the Cranford Club.
Okay,
Let's try it.
Let's try it again.
Yeah.
Oh, this is good.
unless Josh goes around here, the wall is not going to come tumbling down. All right, so we were down in Mountain View Cemetery in the corner looking at the birds, which were a major source of pleasure and interest to Fedelia Bridges. The the little sanctuary was dedicated by her friends, and they were, one of the geniuses of this woman, besides her art, was her ability to form fast friendships, as you will see as I go through this little exposition of her life. One of the things that interested me as I started to look into her life, I knew about her. I knew she was an artist. I knew she came to Canaan and that she was quite successful in her field, but I didn't know much about her. So when I started looking into her in more depth, one of the things that interested me about her was that her life brought together several strands of cultural and social expectations from the Victorian era. These, combined with her personality, created a tantalizing, though indistinct, portrait of a Victorian woman on the cusp of a reluctant emancipation, pushing tentatively at the edges of the male-dominated world, even as she maintained her sense of decorum and ladylike reserve. She was born in Salem, Mass. in 1834, the second child in a family that included her older sister Eliza and her younger siblings Henry and Elizabeth. Her father, Henry Gardner Bridges, was a master of his own ship and commanded several others in the China trade, importing tea, silk, and Chinese porcelain. Three items that Fedelia always had around her throughout her long life. Henry was a well-respected member of the East India Marine Society. His family was comfortably well off, occupying a federal period home in Salem. And following the trends of the day, the home contained examples of Asian art and design, an exposure that would later manifest itself in his daughter's art. Tragically, this harmonious life, which offered the young girl access to many traditional aspects of a genteel young lady's life, such as instruction in art, was cut short when Fedelia was just short of 16 years old. Her father died in Canton, China in December 1849, and her mother, Eliza, died 3 months later, just hours before a ship came into port carrying news of his death. So the children had to absorb the news of two parents' death in one day. This left the oldest sister, Eliza, to step into her parents' shoes, and she became a school teacher to support her younger siblings. That wasn't enough. Teachers didn't earn that much in those days, and the family's possessions were all sold at auction to raise money to help support the family. Sympathetic friends purchased some of the items so the young people could have their precious legacy. The orphans were forced to move out of their family home and into more modest accommodations in the first step toward what would be a largely migratory life for Fedelia. Fedelia had always been a delicate child. This picture, by the way, is when she's about 30. And stunned by the death of her parents, almost simultaneous death of her parents, she became quite ill and was an invalid for some time. She was welcomed into the home of their neighbors, the Paysons, and while she was forced to be in bed, she passed those long hours by drawing. No tablets to absorb their energy in those days. Meanwhile, poor Eliza, who was trying to support this whole family on her own, was facing failing prospects in her school, and it was closed in 1854. By then, Henry had followed his father's example and gone to sea, and he became a dealer in tea eventually. He went to China first and then eventually settled in England. The two girls, three remaining girls, I should say, were left in Salem until their neighbor, their good friend of the family named William Augustus Brown, who was again a sea captain and trader, decided to move to Brooklyn, where he was going to become a wholesale produce dealer. And he invited Fedelia to join his household as a nanny for his then 2 children. Eliza didn't really like that idea very much. She thought that being a nanny would interrupt Fedelia's artistic pursuit. She recognized her sister's talent and wanted her to be able to go on in it. But then another of the lifelong friends of this family, the Whitneys, stepped in. Ann Whitney's brothers had met Eliza when she was teaching in Salem, and they offered to help her start a school in Brooklyn. So the family could all move together. That made it a little more palatable to have Fedelia go. So Elizabeth and Eliza moved to New York, where they started a new school. And Fedelia became the governess for these little kids. There was a lot to be said for moving to New York City, even though they were close to Boston and in Massachusetts. It was a different time and day, and you didn't get in your car and whip into the city to go see the cultural offerings there. When they got to Brooklyn, there was much more exposure to the arts. And soon after they arrived, they came in November, and in January of 1856, Eliza took her younger sister to see an exhibition of British artists that included Landseer, and it was the first time that he had been exhibited in the United States, so she was able to see some prominent people in the British school. She had also read John Ruskin's influential modern painters, and that helped to guide her into the form of art that she eventually pursued. It's impossible to overstate the importance of this kind of exposure for a young artist. These girls were of the middling class, and they would have had art in their home more than in general. But many Americans at that time, this is hard to believe, but many Americans at the time would never have seen a painting. The walls of houses were largely bare, and if they had anything on the walls, they would have preferred a mirror, because mirrors reflected candlelight and reproduced the limited amount of light that they had in their homes. So for her to be able to be in a metropolitan area and to see good art was really important. The first collections of art were in private hands. There were no public museums in the United States, so artists would be seen in private exhibitions which were designed to sell their art, not as collections in a permanent museum. In fact, the first museum in the United States was established by the Peale family, P-E-A-L-E, and Charles Wilson Peale was one of the best artists of colonial America, and he had not even seen a picture until he was 21. He was being trained to become a saddle maker, and he went to buy some leather in Annapolis, Maryland, and he